Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a chance to recharge or ponder on what you've learned. If you're as ready as I am, let's jump right into the second part of our schedule. Ash Ryan Arnwine will be hosting the next panel discussion. Ash will be joined by John Gottfried, Joyce Lynn, and Kerri Schatz to discuss how DevRel teams can use AI today and tomorrow. Welcome, Ash. Thank you for joining us. I will leave it to you to introduce the panel and kick off the discussion.
Cool. Thanks, Natasha. Really appreciate it. Thanks for having all of us here. I'll start by introducing myself and we'll just go around the table first of all. So hi, everybody. I'm Ash. I'm Director of Developer Relations at Nylas. We're a SaaS API platform that lets you build email, calendar, and contacts features into your applications. And I'll just kind of pick up and go around the table from here. First with you, John.
Hey, everyone. I'm John Gottfried, co-founder of Major League Hacking. We are the largest community of early career developers in the world. We work with hundreds of thousands of people to help them bridge the skills gap from what you learn in the classroom to what you use in industry. And then we partner with companies to educate students about their developer platforms and job opportunities. So really excited for this panel.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, John. Been excited to work with you over the years and really appreciate that you made the time to join today. Next up is a former colleague of mine and also podcast partner in crime, Kerri Schatz. Kerri, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Kerri Schatz. I am a senior manager for a product for extensibility, namely Creative Cloud extensibility for Adobe, focusing on building out the capabilities for developers to build extensions and integrations into Creative Cloud applications, both on the desktop and now on the web with Adobe Express. This conversation is well timed and lots of interesting pieces moving with like how do we think about AI and platforms and things like that. So really excited to be part of this conversation. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. Thanks, Kerri. I know it's been a busy time for you with a number of different product launches recently. So excited that you could make time with us today. And at some point, I think we'll also be having Joyce Lynn join us, who's Director of Developer Relations at Postman. And I've had the pleasure of getting to know Joyce a little bit at a few different events over the year, most recently at InfoBip Shift in Croatia. So hopefully, once we get some audio issues fixed, she'll be joining us in the discussion as well. So to put a little background into this, right, we've had the whole peak AI hype thing. We've all been talking about it. We've all been playing with it. The developers that we serve with our products and our services also are eating this stuff up, and everybody has a take. My take simply was, and this dates back to April, which is kind of late in the game, but really just kind of thinking through, here's a new thing that we could probably be using in our day-to-day work. And what I felt like I was hearing from DevRel teams, including my own, was a lot of ideas about how AI could enhance our product. And indeed, that's something that we should be thinking about. But uniquely from DevRel's perspective, I think that there's a lot of more interesting vectors. And I kind of threw out a handful of questions to the team just to see if they had thoughts, specifically on how can we use AI to enhance the way we work right now? How can we help developers that we serve learn to use AI with our API products as they exist today? And also, how can AI enhance the developer experience that we offer? And then, of course, the final one was the product. But I really felt like the product piece of it, where DevRel is concerned, is important, but probably not the right place to start. So I thought I'd just kind of take a moment and, John, hand the mic over to you. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts on just like day to day, how are you seeing DevRel teams leverage AI to enhance the way that they're working already?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think there's two sides of that, right? There's how are DevRel teams using it, but then also how are developers integrating into their own workflows, whether or not the DevRel teams are aware of it. One of the things we've seen becoming more and more common is AI perhaps has the opportunity and is in the early stages of replacing some aspects of like pair programming and one-on-one support. We see a lot of developers, instead of turning to their friend to ask a question, or emailing their professor, or emailing a developer evangelist, or tweeting at someone, or whatever else, right? Posing that question to something like ChatGPT, which is really interesting, right? There's pros and cons to that, because it may not have the most accurate answer, but it will certainly give you an answer. But that behavior is happening really, really organically. The folks that I know who are, making really good use of it from a DevRel perspective are finding ways to tune or train the data to give the most accurate possible answer and insert it into their workflow in a way that feels natural and not too, I don't know, like prescriptive, right? Like developers have a particular way of doing things, and you don't want to interrupt that, but you want to augment it. And I think that that's the best case scenario at the moment.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, especially when it comes to partnering, like pair programming, right? Like we think about like developers jumping in and using something like Copilot, which a lot of us have probably been kind of messing around with for a little over a year at this point. And so there are definitely some pros and cons to that. I find it interesting that sometimes it feels like when we get a wrong answer from an AI, that suddenly like, well, there it is. It's useless. It gave me a wrong answer. But I think the interaction paradigm for developers, if we push on that just a little bit, we can actually find some of the good stuff in there. But it doesn't come without risks, right? So certainly, as you mentioned, things like getting the wrong answer from the AI and then just taking that and plugging it into your code base. So when we think about, like, for example, the last thing that John mentioned was around kind of like, feeding some of our developer resources, for example, into an AI and hopefully enhancing our developer experience in some ways. Kerri, I feel like, as a product manager, a former developer advocate, turned product manager, you probably have some unique thoughts on some of the things maybe you've seen out there, or some of the things that you'd like to try, maybe even some things you've shipped. I'm not sure. But how should we be thinking about leveraging AI inside of the developer experience?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely been things that we've been exploring, and I mean, the biggest point I think is that John just mentioned is developers are already leveraging these tools that are out there, and the challenging aspect is that they will lead you down the wrong path if you are not already familiar enough with that API surface to go like, oh shoot, that method doesn't exist, like change that method to this method, or guide it down the happy path. And so I think one of the biggest important things is building out documentation such that it is easily consumable by these various bots, to ensure that it is accurate, being really clear, not just for the AI, but for the developer themselves. What's the most up-to-date way to do this thing? And that is always a challenge when you have multiple versions, or you have legacy extensibility mechanisms, is like, how do you say use this, not that? And also, how do you guide developers at the point when they're consuming these APIs? So, like from my perspective, they're often building an integration into our product. They're looking at the web page. They're actively building out some code. How can you use that context of what they're currently working in the context of maybe something that isn't a web browser? Because usually when you're building extensions for Adobe, you're inside of, say, Photoshop or something else. How can you use that context to more accurately fine tune the responses? And so I think great documentation is paramount, but also maybe the development of specific tools and specific co-pilots to say, hey, this is, I already understand the context in which you're operating. How can I help guide you? But also, I think it's incredibly valuable just to understand, kind of complete that feedback loop. How are developers using the AI in interaction with your APIs? And where are they having pain points? And, maybe you can use that also to help guide, like, maybe we need to consider adding a method with that name, or maybe we need to figure out how we can update our documentation more appropriately to help guide the tools that people are already using.
Yeah, and so certainly, on the first point, like pumping in things like documentation and other sort of long form written technical resources, From my point of view at this moment, it feels like there's even a heavier importance on those kind of things now, because, you know, if you're not feeding it the proper information, then who is? And then what is it making up in the absence of having access to that?
And it will.
Yeah, it will, right? And by the way, just this probably isn't as germane to the point, but like we just had a developer reach out to us the other day saying, "Hey, I discovered you through ChatGPT," which is equal parts exciting and terrifying, because how do we control whether ChatGPT recommended us over something else? How do we know that? How do we ensure that it knows that it's thinking of us in the right context? So sort of the quote unquote SEO of chatbots is going to be an interesting sort of battleground, for lack of a better word. But when we think about like pulling in, you know, different types of kind of AI into the product surface itself, or enabling developers to pull in their own AI into integrations with our tools, I think there's a lot of interesting things going on out there already. And Joyce, I feel like we've started to see a little bit of Postman talking about this, and admittedly not plugged into all of the announcements, but I feel like I've seen a number come by in my inbox recently from Postman. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on either how, you know, Postman is thinking about like enhancing the existing product with AI, or how they're seeing how you're seeing developers leverage third-party AI in conjunction with Postman. And I think we've got you on mute here. Not yet, not yet. Well, in the interim, we'll see if we can get our backstage. We have a backstage on StreamYard, but we use StreamYard for live streams, by the way, and it's always kind of fun to see these things that like give you the opportunity to like have folks that can help you out in the back. But I want to get into that just a little bit on because certainly like one of the reasons I'm personally curious about this is that while certainly we have some thoughts on AI in our own product roadmap at Nylas, one of the cool things about all of this is that we can just not just, but we can enable developers to say like, hey, pull an AI model off the shelf, and you can use our REST APIs or our SDKs in conjunction with that and do really cool stuff. And I'll just plug right now that one of our developer advocates, Ram, is actually at API World today, maybe right now, giving a talk on that very topic. So I'm curious, like, just in general, like, John, I know that even like your company, Major League Hacking, is experimenting with putting some AI into the product. And I'm curious, like, whether through that or through your interactions with developers out there in the world, how have you started to see developers taking a model and taking existing APIs and mashing them together? And what does that, kind of suggest that DevRel teams should be thinking about?
Yeah. So there's two things I've seen. One, we just launched a beta chatbot whose purpose is to help developers understand how a variety of different APIs can fit into a project idea at a hackathon. One of the really interesting things about working with students and working with hackathons is that people are constantly coming up with novel new project ideas, and they don't know what they don't know, right? So you could be sitting there, building some whatever app, like, it doesn't matter what it is, and you see all these cool pieces of technology out there, and unless you're able to talk to a developer advocate one-on-one, it's often unclear how that particular piece of technology that you've never tried before fits into your app, right? Which is different than, an enterprise buyer journey where they might be coming to you for a solution. Our folks are looking for ways to experiment and try new things. And, I'm excited about the idea that a chatbot can sort of like help them personalize descriptions and ideas around particular developer platforms. I think that's a really cool outcome. I think the other piece of it that you and I were talking about the other day is that, AI and machine learning is not necessarily a new thing for developers, but over the last year, probably the 90% of the projects we see that have some kind of AI component have converged on using OpenAI's API. It went from maybe someone's using PyTorch, maybe someone's training their own model, maybe like whatever. Like there's a million different ways to do it. Now it's all OpenAI use cases. I think it's partially part of the hype cycle. I think that'll fade away as people start to branch out more. But for the time being, like it's you know, that is probably the main like use case we're seeing. And you know, there's limitations to that, but I think there's also a lot of really cool stuff you can do with it. And I've seen some wild stuff out there. Like people are getting really, really creative with how to build these, you know, AI integrations.
One of the things that I found interesting about this dynamic that you're talking about, John, where in the past it might have been a little more about how to train your own model or PyTorch things or that kind of stuff, is we've moved a little bit from, say, the scientist or researcher space, if you will, to developer space, right? Where I can just like pull something off the shelf. And indeed, OpenAI's APIs are a really fun one. That's how I got started, and I believe most of my team did as well. But we've increasingly been jumping on the Hugging Face bandwagon as well, because I kind of think of it as like a record collection where you can just like pull, oh, I want this model to do this thing, and you pull this particular record off the shelf for that thing, that mood that you want to create, or whatever it is. So I think it's a lot of fun. We might use the word democratization. I try not to use that too much, but there is sort of like any developer can show up and do that now. And, you know, like whether we're going to get fantastic results, that's kind of up to our skills, but at least those are there, and we don't have to start with first we must invent the ML universe.
Yeah, it's a much quicker learning curve.
Awesome. Joyce, I want to try your audio one more time.
Can you hear me?
Yes. All right.
Sweet mother of Mary. I joined just to hear John talking about how generative AI is taking over our jobs. Amazing. But I couldn't say anything.
So yeah, but I want to come back to that question, Joyce, on that I mentioned a minute ago, because I think you're in a really unique position to talk about that, which Postman has such a giant mind share in the developer community. And whether it's Postman starting to put AI into its products and services, or if you're seeing, I don't know, like developers leverage AI in different ways, whether it's to design their own API surfaces or whatnot. I'm just curious to start with, like, what are you seeing out there right now?
Yeah, I think it's really privileged to be part of a popular dev tools that is rolling this in now. And there's definitely stuff that Postman's rolling out. We have something called PostBot, where you can generate code like in the scripting areas. We have something called Flows, which is supposed to be like low code, but it's a little bit complicated now. So you kind of have to be a developer to figure it out. I personally use Postman's like Gen AI for stuff that I would have normally had to look at the docs for, or look at some boilerplate and drop it in. So the repetitive stuff, the stuff where, you know, like you don't know off the top of your head. But I personally think that generative AI for developers is at a very different place than it is for developer relations professionals right now. And you might have already talked about that, but I am so excited about all the stuff happening in, you know, a lot of creative tools are generating some stuff. Code it can write much better, faster code than I can, even like with the hallucinations. And you know, if you tell it it's wrong, usually it'll reconcile. It has some loop to reconcile. But for developer relations, that's where I'm very hopeful. But like the type of stuff that is coming out of like a ChatGPT or some of the other, you know, image generators and stuff like that, I think is still a long ways to go. I would love for it to be able to help me write like a conference talk faster, but the human aspect is still like not quite there. I'd be curious to see if you guys have really good recommendations for generative AI for DevRel professionals.
Yeah, this is such a good question, and I want to give everyone a chance to weigh in on it. I mean, from my point of view, typically, like when I'm interacting with a chatbot, I'm really not looking for an answer. What I'm looking for is a thought partner, someone who can help me kind of embellish on my own ideas and also help me find the white space in my ideas. And so I really encourage developer advocates, not so much to look at like using ChatGPT or the like to write their, say, like blog posts or whatever, but to round them out in a way. So like we can kind of start with the outline, right? And kind of flesh that out a bit. And then, okay, now I've got a draft. Help me find some spots where I could be a little more clear or a little more concise or what have you. And I've personally had a lot of success with that. And it seems like the developer advocates on the team do as well. But I have to say that none of those are bespoke tools. It's all mostly ChatGPT. So yeah, I don't know. Does John or Kerri, do either of you have a point of view on in terms of just like using these models as a way to have like a thought partner that helps DevRel professionals get where they're trying to go faster?
Yeah, that's something that just in my own personal experience, whenever I have been interacting with, say, ChatGPT or any of these kinds of models, is if I go into it looking for the answer, then it's really easy to dismiss the response as either it's incorrect or it's like, well, that's not how I would do it, or it doesn't come off feeling as particularly useful in a presentation or whatnot. But I definitely value its ability to perhaps highlight things that I'm missing, or if it's coming up with this very same things, is like, well, that's good. Maybe I've already got, a decent picture to share. I think the challenging thing, especially when I'm thinking about it from like a DevRel perspective of like generating documentation and things like that, is you have to double check everything it's doing. That can't be the final output. There's a lot of work to make sure that the final output is correct and accurate and still flows nicely and doesn't come across, going on strange tangents or whatnot. But as a thought partner, it has proven very valuable if I go into it with that mindset. It's like having a conversation versus going into it with, give me the answer and then I'll take that wholesale.
Yeah, so in some ways, like in the, sort of, if you think of like a double diamond model or the like, where you're really just exploring and exploding the idea space first, it's hugely helpful there. But I still think that there's like, I think the point that we're all seem to be coming to is like on the way back down to refining it into something that we want to deliver to customers or developers. Like we don't want to relinquish control. So we really need to use our own judgment and our own knowledge of the situation to kind of dial that in. So in some ways, I've noticed myself that maybe using an AI, it doesn't necessarily speed me up. It just makes the output better in some situations. John, and I think you had a comment there as well.
I mean, I was just I agree 100% with what you both are saying. I think I think that training is the big problem for all of this. Like, the tools are capable, they give you good output. One of the things that a lot of DevRel teams and docs teams have to deal with is, keeping their content up to date, keeping it accurate, keeping it, using modern best practices, like dealing with versioning. And at the moment, like, AI kind of does a really bad job with that because it's not trained on the latest, greatest thing. It's trained on something like a year ago. And you see this like pop up in all sorts of weird ways. Like, even ChatGPT's generated code using OpenAI's helper libraries is wrong because it's out of date. And like, they can't even, like, manually train that up necessarily. And so I think that, like, if someone can solve that problem, it can be a really good assistant for like direct integration potential, like helping you write tutorials, helping personalize docs to someone's skill level or understanding. Like, there's all of these cool places it could fit in. But at the moment, it's like, I think the best case scenario is it's a thought partner, right? It's something that helps generate ideas and then you have to do the hard work. And I've certainly seen all these examples of people building fully fledged apps with it, but I have yet to see really good examples of that happening with really specific proprietary up-to-date API docs. Like, it's almost always stuff that doesn't change as often.
Yeah, and I find, like, especially if you're like doing research on a really new topic or a very niche topic, a lot of times I feel like AI, it's John, what you said, it's what's in the model, and the large language model is scraping a marketing website. So then how substantial are you going to be building your stuff off of? For Postman, I've been at Postman for like almost 7 years, and I've been the seminal piece that the language model's scraping, and now it's like, it's very derivative, I find.
I love the comment in chat that it's from Liz or something. That's a rubber duck, right? It's like the best rubber duck ever.
Yeah, and I think that if nothing else, like for DevRel professionals right now, that's one of the great takeaways is, because when you see the reactions on either end of the spectrum, oh, it was wrong, therefore it's useless, or I'm gonna throw everything into an AI and somehow that'll work out well for my developers on the platform. There's a middle path, and we're all going to be kind of grasping for that as we try different tools over time. So I'm just curious, the notion of leveraging AI for customized onboarding experiences has come up a couple of times now. I'm curious, like, how comfortable do you feel about kind of going all in on something like that right now? I mean, for us right now, we are trying a little bit of that at the moment, and certainly I've seen that in a number of other places. But when it comes to customized onboarding, there is a part of me that worries about putting somebody into a little bit of a hole where they themselves are getting this one bespoke experience that we don't know about and may be wrong. So I'm curious, like, are there some kind of entry points that you all are seeing to kind of try this stuff out without throwing developers into the deep end of the pool, the AI pool? Maybe Joyce, I don't know if this is something that Postman's working on or if you've seen that out there in the wild, but when it comes to a developer just showing up at the front door, how quickly do we want to bring AI into their onboarding?
Yeah, I can't say that Postman's doing anything very specific with specifically generative AI at the early part of the life cycle, but I think it can play a very easy role in the empty states, right? So if you have a blank screen and then you want to throw boilerplate on there and then immediately start, I mean, why not? I think it really depends on the tool though.
Yeah, 100%. And that, I mean, it depends is going to be like so important, again, in like hitting the right level of that spectrum. Kerri, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah. I think it also there's this challenge that I feel like I face in terms of there's personalization at what the developer wants to accomplish, but there's also skill level. And one of the challenges is that I found is that how do you give or onboard a developer who may not have a lot of skills in this and they're just starting out, guide them down an onboarding path. But if they don't know where things are likely going wrong, how much more, does that do damage or more time in terms of them figuring out the solution if they don't understand how to address the problem? Whereas if you're a very advanced developer coming into the platform, you can say like, oh yeah, that pattern looks suspect to me. I'll tweak my prompt or adjust it and get the right results out. So I think there's also that challenge of not only, I think AI would be great at suggesting things like, oh, you want to do this? Well, maybe here's some APIs or some modules or what have you that could be useful in that path. But then there is always that little bit of a risk of someone who doesn't know what they don't know yet, going down a path that will at worst or at best maybe just delay them finding the right answer. And at worst, maybe they never discover it.
That's fascinating because in a lot of ways, like I tend to want to push towards like just letting developers find the value and getting that quick win in without us burdening them with asking a ton of questions about who they are. However, if the AI doesn't know who they are, how can it customize? And so I'm immediately worried about a scenario where someone shows up to the front page and says, okay, please select from these drop downs who you are. And then we'll give you this sort of like it's kind of made on the fly experience. And that our form could accidentally pigeonhole them into the wrong place because it's asking the wrong questions, or who knows. So and I'm sure there's better ways to solve that problem, but that's where my imagination immediately went.
And I think I don't know if you guys have seen Copilot X lately, but Kerri, you mentioned it earlier about like context switching and being able to keep somebody directly in the flow. Like you can highlight specific parts and have continual conversations. It's not just a one-time transaction. The client keeps the context of that conversation.
I think that's really important. Like sometimes, like just because I'm playing with ChatGPT as a new tool, like the range of my conversations is quite large. But especially when you're thinking about a DevRel experience of, that if you have that developer coming back again, chances are good that their previous context is still valuable. Like they're still trying to accomplish the same things. Like being able to start from that point rather than the developer having to restate all the assumptions, I think is incredibly valuable.
Yeah, I want that sort of like JS lint config type thing. John and I spoke about this when we were kind of getting ready for the session recently, but I've definitely had that moment where I'm like, hey, show me how to write a function that writes in Node.js that writes a file to the file system, and it comes back with like callbacks and all these other things. And I'm like, no, I want to do this asynchronously. Then it's promises. I'm like, no, async await, please. And also let's use const and let instead of var. And all these, so you coach it to that point, but I don't want to do that every time. And so I feel like there's some sort of like in JS world, we have like a JS lint config that'll state all your druthers and preferences or whatever. There's a lot of types of tools like that, but being able to have that AI maintain that context across a lot of your interactions feels like it would be pretty important.
Yes, but when would you ever be able to speak to a junior, somebody you're pair programming with, and being so demanding? So like, what luxury we have today?
No, it's fantastic. It's like, but I have to say, I don't know what your take on this is, but when I was kind of kicking some ideas about how to chat with it back and forth with our CEO about 6 months ago, I shared a chat and with him that I was doing in ChatGPT, and he came back and he was like, Ash, I too praise the bot. And I was like, wait, what? And I realized I'm being like really nice to this thing all the time, but I think the underlying assumption was that, well, one, I just want to do that in general, but in life, but also like it feels like I get a little something from it, and I don't know if that's imagined or otherwise, but I try not to just like bark at it as much as I can. Dev tools. So here's where I think the UX of interacting with AI and DevRel can really kind of start to come together in some interesting ways. Right now, most of the UX, user experience of working with a chatbot revolves around either chatting with it. Well, I called it a chatbot, so let me step back for a second. Working with models, AI models. So doesn't have to be chat. And indeed, in this context, it probably won't be. So right now, anytime you're using AI, a lot of times it's going to be either chat or auto-completes. And you can see why when you've worked with it, right? You don't have to take the output as the developer of the application and do anything with it that would crash your app. You're exposing strings to the user as is, or with, maybe you're cleaning it up. But I'm interested to think about like in dev tools, like where are we going to end up putting AI in these things? Like, are we going to push it below the surface to the point where like the developer is working with your CLI or your API or like some kind of like SDK that you have, and things are happening under the hood that may not necessarily be deterministic, and then they get back a result? Is that going to be okay? I'm just curious, like where you think in a dev tool, however you want to interpret that word, where AI can go after this, that's not just let's expose the resulting strings back to the user verbatim. So John, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that one at this stage.
I mean, you're kind of talking about like the user experience of AI in dev tools. I mean, the most interesting things I've seen are like not super obvious that it's just a chat prompt going back and forth. And I don't necessarily mean autocomplete either. Like I've seen a couple of prototypes now where, the content on the page is adjusted on the fly based on different variables so that you can see different output for different people, right? And that is probably using ChatGPT on the back end, but it's not literally spitting a prompt back and forth. I think like for developer tools, a lot of the stuff that I have been playing around with personally is around like sort of how do you automate some of this stuff? Like, it's really easy to go into ChatGPT and paste a piece of code and ask it to emulate it or give it a prompt. I have a couple of side projects where we're doing things like capturing errors, passing in the relevant code snippet and the error, and then opening a GitHub issue with the suggested fix from ChatGPT. Right? There's a lot of really interesting stuff like that I could imagine being part of a developer console where you log in and you can see all of your error reports and it could give you a recommendation of what's going wrong with your app, right? So there's like all of these like possibilities, and I'm playing with some of them myself out of curiosity. I've seen a couple of other people's prototypes in this area. I haven't seen anything that is in generally available production around this yet. But that's the kind of stuff I'm excited about. It's like automation and hiding the fact that it's a chat, but using it in the results.
That's really cool in terms of just like parsing tons of error messages and making some stabs at a suggestion is awesome. Indeed, I remember now I mentioned to you I had a Mac that was crashing recently, and that always gives you gibberish when it's like, hey, we're gonna send this pages and pages of stuff to Apple. So I just dumped that into, I think it was ChatGPT, and it actually found the issue, which was super helpful. But I would have not been able to do that myself, mostly due to lack of patience or understanding of what's in there. So, Kerri, how about you? From a DevTools perspective, anything that you're thinking about? I mean, you and I, for example, had an opportunity to work on at least one CLI together, and I'm curious, like, is that where we'll see some AI get baked under the hood, or do you think that it'll happen somewhere else?
Yeah, I mean, I think it could happen in the CLI, or maybe like even a playground or whatnot. Like I'm kind of imagining a couple of scenarios in my brain. Of one is just what John just talked about, is like, is there a way when something goes wrong, can you help guide the developer to the solution without either spewing unhelpful error messages or basically boiling the ocean? This thing could have gone wrong for 1,000 reasons. Oh, developer, you get to figure out which one it is. It's like, based upon the context of your app, maybe it is these 3 or 4 issues or one issue, and help pinpoint the developer that way. But I'm also thinking about the onboarding side of the house, not just where things go wrong, but suggesting happy paths to the developers. Like, you're trying to do this, well, maybe you need maybe this is the next step of the CLI that you need to work on, or maybe you need to incorporate this particular functionality, this method, this library, et cetera, et cetera. So kind of like linting, but maybe not to that degree of, perhaps even recognizing patterns of, you're calling this in a certain way. Here's a risky pattern. This may lead to issues down the road. So kind of like analysis a little bit, but also guidance as to, well, what's your next step going to be? I think that could be really interesting.
That's really cool.
And I think I don't know if you guys meant this disparagingly, but chatbot, like, maybe I still have childlike wonder. Ash, I think you did a tweet or something, is like, is the hype train like over? It's like, no, we're just getting started. And I think I say this a lot about low code. Low code's going to change the denominator, right? It's not just going to be developers working with some of this tech. It's going to be like a lot more people. But again, it's not quite there. Even like the draggy droppies are not quite there. And just to have natural, let's make it sound important and call it natural language, like, right? So like, having this layer on it just makes it so much more accessible, and not even just like, like, let's connect it to our digital assistant, do some of that automation that John's talking about. But like, just, I don't quite know what to ask, but it knows how to fuzzy, like, search that, right? And so I think this is going to embiggen a lot of our markets, and we're going to have to be talking to new, like, tinkerers.
It's such a good call. And Kerri, certainly in our past lives together working at Adobe, we had this problem all the time, which, or not problem, but opportunity, which was like, if you use the word developer, suddenly a bunch of people working with your APIs felt excluded. That's going to embiggen, to use Joyce's word, across a lot of different spaces. And okay, so, oh my God, I talked to you all about this literally all day. And I know that we're about at time. I want to do a quick run around the horn, and we'll start, Joyce, with you. Just tell people where they can find you, assuming you want to be found.
Yeah, so can be found on, you mean like my socials?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, find me on TikTok.
Great. Kerri?
You can find me on mastodon.cloud or LinkedIn.
John?
I have my handle up here. I'm John Marco on every platform in existence, whatever you call it these days: Twitter, X, LinkedIn, Mastodon, probably TikTok. I don't know.
John, you're amazingly consistent with that. Sometimes
the only
I show
one
up
I
on
know
a network and I'm like, oh, there's John. And you can find me. I'm Ash. If you search on LinkedIn for Ash Ryan, I'll be the only one that pops up, I'm sure. And in addition to that, I'll just plug Kerri and I do a podcast called I'd Rather Be Scripting.com. And we just talk about fun coding and scripting stuff. And so please join us there too. I just want to say thanks to the whole DevRelX team for letting us come together and do this. And again, for the panelists, Joyce, John, Kerri, thanks for making the time today. Really exciting discussion, and appreciate all the comments that came through along the way. It was happening so fast I couldn't keep up. I apologize, but awesome to see the engagement there as well. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Ash. Thank you, everyone on the panel. If you have any more questions or wish to discuss with Ash, John, Joyce, and Kerri, please drop by the DevRelX channel on Slack. And since Moskula talked about sharing the love, let me welcome Steve, who will be your host for the next part of the summit.